Scott Lauber from the Inquirer going to join us to give us some more insight on the breakdown here of this proposal that came out this morning. As he writes, it's about money, but for the players, it's really about principle. Is that principle going to get in the way? We'll find out more right now. Scott Lauber covers the Phillies. Major League Baseball is certainly under the microscope. They're running out of time, Scott, and as we know, both sides just don't want to budge. They can't come to an agreement. And what is the proposal today? 76 games, the way it kind of shakes out, and the players, McCutchen, LOL, just completely disinterested. What's the message between the latest proposal and the players' reaction?
Well, I mean, we could get into the weeds about percentages and prorated salaries and reductions above the original prorated salary and all these things. But really, at the end of the day, all that matters to the players is that this latest proposal, just like the last one, essentially reopens a negotiation that they thought was closed on March 26th. And requests that they make additional salary concessions on top of what they agreed to. And as long as MLB asks for that deal to be reopened, the players are going to reject anything. So that's their stance. That's their principle. And they say, look, if we reopen a negotiation that was closed, it sets a bad precedent going forward, and they've got a very complicated and potentially contentious CBA to negotiate next year. The last thing they want to do is set a bad precedent in terms of their negotiating tactics and their stance. So are they biting off their nose to spite their face? Maybe so, but it seems like as long as the owners are going to ask, or as long as the league is going to ask for additional salary concessions, that's going to be a non-starter for the players.
Is that accurate in your opinion, though? In other words, if we concede in this particular negotiation, isn't this just such a unique circumstance? Why would any concession in this show weakness for the one coming forward? Do you agree with that sentiment?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't negotiate contracts of this nature, so I don't know. It would certainly seem like, this is a unique set of circumstances and should be treated as a one-off. It should be treated as such. But what I think is at the root of all of this is that for almost 50 years, the players and the owners have not trusted one another. There have been, I think, 5 strikes and 3 lockouts since 1972. And the toll of all of that over generations has caused the two sides to not trust one another. And so I think what you're seeing is, at least on the union side, is, well, we're not going to reopen a negotiation because we don't trust that that you're not going to use that against us in further negotiations. I don't know enough about it to know whether that's paranoid or founded or well-founded, but it looks like that's how it's going to be.
If forced to play the 48-game season, do you think you will see the players show their displeasure at all?
Well, I think that they're limited in how they can show their displeasure. I mean, I think look, there's fighting over the language in this March 26th agreement that we keep hearing about. I believe the wording is that they would actually, I'm just trying to look it up here just so that I get it exactly. I believe the wording is that they would be able to revisit that agreement if the season were to be played without fans. And there's some question about interpreting the language there and whether or not the owners do have the right to do that. That they would, quote unquote, discuss in good faith the economic feasibility of playing games in the absence of spectators. That's the language. So there's some question over that. Now, what there doesn't seem to be any question over is whether the owners, whether the league, whether MLB and Commissioner Rob Manfred have the right to set the schedule. That seems to be very clear in the March 26th agreement, is that the commissioner has the power to set a schedule. So if the commissioner says, I decree that we play 50 games, the players have to play 50 games. What they will then do as I suppose you could call it a reaction to that or a protest of that, is that they would likely then withhold their approval of expanded playoffs, which is what the owners really want. They would say no expanded playoffs. We're not going to agree to that this year or next year. That will have to be negotiated in the next agreement. That would be their one recourse that I can see. I guess within that, then certain players could decide not to play, in which case they wouldn't get paid. But that's their decision to say, I'm not going to risk my health, or I'm not going to risk my financial future. Let's say you're a free agent, right, this winter, and the agreement on March 26th affords you the right, whether you play or not this year, to gain your service time necessary toward your free agency. So if you're Mookie Betts or if you're JT Realmuto and you're eligible, you would have been eligible for free agency in the offseason. You're still going to be eligible whether you play 50 games this year, 80 games this year, or 0 games this year. So if you were a free agent to be, could you say that you're not going to risk an injury over a season that would last less than 2 months that could endanger your financial future in free agency? Sure, you could say that. You could decide to sit out. You just wouldn't get paid this year. So that's the one thing that they can do individually. I don't know how many guys would actually choose that route, but there doesn't seem to be a tremendous amount of recourse overall about what they could do.
Scott Lauber's with us here from the Inquirer. At what point does the commissioner finally step in and say, all right, you two sides can't come to an agreement, I'm stepping in and making the 50 game or however many games he decrees? I mean, at what point does that happen?
Well, I think the first thing would be, he works for the owners, so he would have to have ownership sign off on that. The owners would have to decide that they want to go through with a 50-game season, and then he can go ahead and set the schedule. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to find ways to bring the players back to the table. It seems the players are dug in, though, and they're not coming back to the table to discuss anything if there are further reductions beyond what they agreed to in March. So, if the owners decide that they will pay full, the owners basically have to decide how many games they're willing to play at the full prorated salaries, and then I think that's the number that they settle on, whether that's 50 or 48 or 60. We've heard in the range of 48 to 60, somewhere in that range. Once they decide on how much money they're willing to pay, then based on that prorated number, that's how many games they'll play.
Do you think the league will be looked down upon if the 48-game season is in play, or once they're back on the field, do you think it's business as normal and people will just watch because, baseball is back?
I think that's a great question to ask all your callers. I think you could certainly make the claim that 50 games are better than none, but I think you could also make the argument that baseball has come off looking so bad throughout this whole entire process that a lot of fans are going to be done with baseball, no matter what they do, if they come back short of a half a season or a more representative season. The other thing you have to keep in mind is the opportunity that they seem to be blowing here. The idea that they could come back on the 4th of July and play an 82-game season and really have the entire month of July to themselves, and to claim that they are playing at least a small role in helping the country heal from a global pandemic that has killed over 110,000 people, unemployment that's risen to 14%, and civil unrest over police treatment of African Americans. Baseball could have come back on the 4th of July and said, we're going to help the country heal, and we're going to play a part in that. Now they're bickering over principle of negotiations and salaries and things of that nature. If they come back for a fraction of a half a season, 50-game season, they're going to be competing against the NBA and the NHL, which will be into their playoffs. The NFL will be likely, I guess, in training camp and ready to start their season, or at least try to. So there's no longer going to be this captive audience that baseball would have had they come back on the 4th of July and done so triumphantly. This is going to it's going to feel like they're just sort of coming back because, well, heck, 50 games is better than none, and neither side's going to be real happy with that. And I don't know how you sell that to a public, even a public that's starving for sports.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing earlier, there's a lot of back and forth, and many times players, it seems that fans typically take the player's side. This one here seems to be kind of split. You don't know whose side to take here. But I guess the question would be, Scott, is can that all be forgotten if baseball said, all right, we didn't get it out there on the 4th of July, but, July 15th we're going to start. I mean, if they get out there before hockey and basketball launch their seasons, would everything kind of be forgotten from everybody, in your opinion? In terms of, what, we didn't do it the right way. It wasn't the prettiest, but we're out there before everybody else.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think it's going to be dependent upon how frustrated people are with baseball. Look, I saw something on Twitter, guys. You know that when I came back, before I came back to Philly, I spent 8 years in Boston, and I saw something on Twitter last week where a sports talk radio host up there asked a simple Twitter poll question: do you want Major League Baseball to come back and play in 2020? A straight yes or no answer. They got over 13,000 respondents, and 58.6% said no. They don't want MLB back this year. And Boston's a baseball city still. One of the few where baseball is still, I don't know if it's certainly not number one anymore, but it's, we always used to say there was 1 and 1A, right? Still, and that's there, and that's what they're hearing. So I don't know. I think it's just how badly did the two sides come off looking throughout this whole thing? How do they sort of frame a return, especially if it's a 50-game forced return that the players did not agree to? How do they frame that as a victory? And how do they try to build any kind of enthusiasm for that when the players themselves are not real enthusiastic about it?
Overall, do they get something done, or does the commissioner step in? How do you see this playing out?
I think after today, I think that it feels more and more like we're headed toward a mini season, sort of a 50-game brokered mini season in which the players would receive their full prorated salaries that they believe they're entitled to based on that March agreement. And the owners say, all right, well, if that's going to be the case, then we can only play this very short number of games. And there won't be expanded playoffs this year. It'll end in October the way the owners want it to because they're afraid of a second wave of the coronavirus. Again, it becomes the question of how do you sort of gin up enthusiasm for something that felt like it was forced upon the players and, in turn upon the fans. So I think unless there's a dramatic shift in the tone of these negotiations and what both sides are willing to do, I suppose it's on the owners too. I mean, the owners could say, look, all right, we give in, fine. We'll take the loss that it's going to, the significant loss that it's going to be to play 82 games at your full prorated salaries, but we'll do it. They could, or, play 70 games or something a little bit closer to a half a season. I guess the owners could cave on that too. But right now it just seems like both sides are dug in, and we're headed for some sort of 50-game mini-season settlement here.
Scott Lauber covers the Phillies. Major League Baseball, obviously still with no agreement. Follow him at Scott Lauber. Check his workout at the Inquirer. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks for coming on in short notice, Scott.
Sure thing, guys. Anytime.
Great breakdown, and he's got a really good article about it at theinquirer.com, at Scott Lauber on Twitter to get that article.